All right, let's jump right in. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're tackling something absolutely massive. I'm talking about the invisible scaffolding of global finance. Think about it. Every war, every economic crisis, every single boom and bust, they all sit right on top of this hidden architecture. We interact with it constantly, yet, we rarely actually understand it. So we're going to unravel a financial mystery today that fundamentally shapes our modern world. Just take a look at that number. $315 trillion. Let that staggering scale sink in for just a second. That is the total amount of global debt right now. To put that insane figure into perspective, we're talking about nearly 3 times the size of the entire global economy. Literally every country on Earth is in debt. Even massive export powerhouses like Germany and China, or, oil-rich nations like Saudi Arabia, they all owe enormous sums. But see, this brings us to a glaring, massive contradiction. If everybody owes money, who exactly is owed, right? If every single nation, every bank, and every citizen is carrying the weight of all this borrowing, who is sitting at the very top collecting on it all? That's the central riddle of our explainer today. We're going to follow this chain of creditors all the way up and see exactly what we find. Because, as you know, nothing in the world of money and power is ever as simple as it looks. Now, astronomical debt isn't just an American failure or some localized issue. It is a planetary system. Sure, the United States is at a historic high, owing over $38 trillion. But look at the European Union, carrying around $14 trillion, and Japan sitting at almost $9 trillion. Get this. Global borrowing is actually increasing by the equivalent of $1 trillion every 100 days. No way, right? So to figure out how we got here, we really have to rewind the clock. So, Part 1. The birth of national debt, from war to wealth. To truly understand this debt, we've got to look at where it came from. And surprisingly, it wasn't invented on Wall Street. It was actually invented as a tool of ultimate power. Back in 1694, England was fighting France and literally running out of gold. The king needed a fix fast, so he turned to the merchants. He traded them a permanent stream of interest payments, which were backed by future taxes, for immediate upfront financing. To manage this whole operation, the Bank of England was created. And this was a huge game changer because suddenly the state could spend money it didn't even have yet. In return, lenders got a tradable promise. France copied it, the Netherlands refined it, and eventually, the United States adopted it to fund its own revolution and westward expansion. This profound shift in history really boils down to one crucial idea. The battlefield became the balance sheet. What that means is national debt completely transformed. It went from being this mark of failure to the ultimate measure of an empire's credibility. The ability to borrow essentially became the ability to rule. Before this, empires actually had to conquer territory to extract gold. Now, they could just issue bonds to extract interest. Which brings us to part 2, unmasking the true creditor, following the $38 trillion. Now that we know how it all started, let's figure out who holds the other end of the rope today. Using the United States as our prime example, we can actually shatter a really popular myth. You hear it all the time, right? China owns all of America's debt. Well, in reality, China holds roughly 2% of the total. That's it. About 2/3 of this massive $38 trillion is held by domestic institutions and the Federal Reserve. So the truth is, most of the debt America owes, it owes right back to itself. Let's break down the actual mechanics of how this functions, because honestly, it's a mesmerizing system. Okay, step 1. The Treasury issues bonds. Step 2. American banks, mutual funds, and pension funds scoop them up. Step 3. The Federal Reserve often buying those bonds right back and creates new dollars in the process. Step 4. Everyday citizens pay their taxes, which fund the interest on those exact bonds. And finally, Step 5. That interest flows right back into the retirement accounts of those very same citizens. So the debt is entirely real, but the creditor is mostly just a reflection of the same system. Every citizen is simultaneously a debtor and a creditor. It's wild. And this whole circular mirror thing, it isn't just an American phenomenon. It operates globally. It is literally a planetary game of hot potato made entirely of promises. Japan lends to the US through treasuries. The US lends to Europe through the IMF. Europe lends to developing nations through the World Bank, and then those developing nations lend right back to advanced economies by buying Western bonds. It's kind of like a massive poker table where every single player has borrowed chips from the person sitting next to them. Every promise is secured by another promise. But behind all these countries passing IOUs back and forth, there's a fourth layer. These are the true arbiters of credit. We're talking about the heavy hitters here. hedge funds, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and of course, the modern high priests of the system, central banks. They manage tens of trillions in assets. They are the ones who decide which nations can borrow cheaply and which are going to pay a massive premium just to survive. Democracy might decide who governs, but make no mistake, these markets decide who survives.
All right, part 3. Why repayment means ruin. The never repay secret.
For this next part, we have to completely throw out our conventional understanding of how debt works. Look, we all have a strong personal bias about borrowing. For a normal household, you take a loan, you're expected to repay the principal, and your ultimate goal is a zero balance, right? But governments operate in a totally different reality. They treat debt more like a rolling subscription. The goal isn't a zero balance. The goal is to roll it over indefinitely to maintain stability and, you guessed it, generate interest. And that brings us to the magic of refinancing. By constantly issuing new bonds to pay off old ones, governments turn interest into a sort of rent that they charge for keeping the global economy stable. They literally never plan to pay off their debt. Not now, not ever. And look, that isn't some crazy conspiracy. It's literally standard economic policy. The global economy is basically a shark. It has to keep swimming, keep refinancing, just to breathe. Which leads us to this incredibly counterintuitive, genuinely mind-blowing truth. Paying off the debt would destroy the very thing that makes the economy function. Wait, why? Well, because government debt is literally the safest collateral in existence. Pension funds hold it, banks use it as security, central banks treat it as literal money. If the U.S. somehow actually paid down every last dollar of its debt, the world's most trusted financial instrument would just vanish. The dollar supply would shrink drastically, and it would trigger a massive deflationary collapse. So, your absolute crucial takeaway here is that a sustainably growing debt is the heartbeat of modern capitalism. It's what keeps the system functioning. Governments keep issuing more, not recklessly, but rhythmically. It pulses through every pension, every mortgage, and every market on Earth. A politician's goal isn't actually to eliminate debt, even if that's what they say on the campaign trail. The real goal is to keep it serviceable and desirable enough that the system never stops believing in it. Section 4. A fragile loop of trust. When the music stops. Now, let's slow down a second, because we have to ask, what happens when that collective belief simply fails? Because while this closed loop of trust can stretch indefinitely, it is certainly not invincible. We've seen exactly what happens when confidence breaks. Look at Greece in 2010. Unpayable debt led to panicked bondholders, and the resulting bailouts forced extreme austerity, tax hikes, and mass unemployment. In Argentina, repeated defaults have turned their debt into a literal national curse. In Sri Lanka, running out of foreign currency to service loans caused fuel shortages and an outright political collapse. When the market loses faith, those anonymous creditors suddenly become very visible, holding entire nations by the throat with just devastating human costs. And honestly, there is an even more sobering reality to this whole architecture. Trust is not evenly distributed. When we say we owe it to ourselves, well, that's really only half true. The interest payments you and I fund through our taxes, they don't flow equally through society. They flow upward. They go from everyday taxpayers and workers straight to the wealthy institutions and investors that hold the debt. That is exactly why global inequality and global indebtedness rise together. The system rewards those who own debt, and frankly, punishes those who merely pay it. But ultimately, creditors aren't villains and debtors aren't victims. They are really just two sides of the exact same engine. The modern financial system has basically turned debt itself into money. Debt used to mean bondage. Today, it means balance. But we are left with a haunting question to close out this explainer. What happens when the engine runs out of fuel? What happens when new borrowing simply cannot keep pace with the promises made yesterday? Because if that balance ever tips, the illusion ends, and we will all suddenly remember what a debt really is, a promise that cannot be kept forever. Thank you so much for joining me, and I really hope this changes how you look at the world around you.